Like many things we do in the fitness industry, sometimes we just do it because we saw somebody else. Well, the mini band isn't much different. We need to understand why we're using it to activate certain areas of the body and how we need to position it. Hey, I'm Lee Taft. Let me share with you some of the little tricks that I use with the mini band to help make sure we activate our bodies correctly, especially when we're working with athletes ready to explode within 5-10 minutes after activation exercises. Okay, first thing, we want to make sure we understand what happens when we place the band at different parts of our body. So the first thing I want to go through is, if I position the band up pretty high above my knee, and I'm going to do lateral walks, because the band is not far from my hips, okay, what happens is when I begin my walking, before I get too far, I get an initiation of my hips start to activate. But it's not real strong because the band is so close. So my feet actually can move out a decent amount, and I don't have a tremendous amount of pressure, okay? So I think it's important if you have a young athlete, an athlete coming back from injury, probably not a bad idea to start them high, or if you're just trying to loosen somebody up, you're not really trying to get a strong tension and activation through a little bit tighter band, we want to keep it a little higher. So if I do this walk, not real challenging, I feel it obviously, but it's not going to activate me as maybe as deep or as challenging as I might want it with an athlete that has to perform a little bit harder, okay? So if I move it down and I go, let's say, to the middle of my calves, now immediately, without even moving, I can feel it wanting to push me inside. It wants me to abduct me. So as I start walking, I'm going to feel this much more, and I do. I'm only taking a few steps here just to demonstrate, but I feel it a lot more. Same goes when I bring it all the way down to the ankles. Now it gets even more challenging. So the point at which my hips get activated has a lot to do with where I position the band on my leg. So it's important to know that and understand that when you're working with weaker athletes as compared to stronger athletes, or if your goal is maybe after a game or a workout, you just simply want to kind of get a little bit of light activation, a little bit of blood flow, a little bit of innervation, and you're not really after challenging them that hard. You want to know where you want to go with it, okay? The next thing is, if I position the band around my feet, okay, so if you look at it now, I have it pretty much up over my shoelaces, okay, where I would tie my knot. Not a lot different than being around my ankles, but it still is, because the further I get away from my hip, my muscles of the hips, which are the things we're trying to activate, a little bit more challenging, okay? So now when I start to walk, and I'm going to walk towards you, I want to make sure, a couple things, I don't waddle, so I don't lift my hip or my shoulders, and I want to make sure that I don't scrape my feet for two reasons. Number one, I don't want the friction. Number two, I don't want to burn the bands, okay? So as I walk towards you, this is more challenging than it was when it was up here or mid-calf, and maybe a little bit more on my ankles. But now, if I take this band and I move it out further, so maybe mid-foot, okay? Now I start to introduce stability and control of my hip rotators. So if I were to relax my feet and lift my toes, my feet would get pulled in. Because that's what's happening, is the band is trying to, release its tension, and the muscles of my hips, if I relax them, well, that's what occurs. My feet go in. So I want to make sure that I keep my feet out. So now, not only do I get to work on the lateral aspect of my hip, I also get to work on the rotators of my hip. So when I walk now, I got to try to keep those feet straight. Don't let my toes get pulled inward. If I want to challenge a little bit more, I come out a little bit further. Okay? And now I really have to work. So I get the benefit of both my lateral hip musculature and my external rotators. Okay. Another thing that you have to consider, and this is my last point here, when you do band walks, whether you're doing them at the hips, the knees, the thighs, the knees, the calves, ankles, or down around the feet, make sure you walk at different knee bend and hip bend angles, all right, or degrees. And the reason is because when we actually move, we don't just, like I watch most athletes or coaches teach doing it from an athletic stance. Well, we're not always in an athletic stance, in that athletic stance. When we plant our foot, if I make a hard cut in a foot plant, I'm fairly straight. So when my athletes do the band walks, whether it's around the feet or higher, what we encourage is that they change the height of their walk every couple steps. So they'll go like this. They'll walk a few like this, they bend a little bit more. Go a little bit more, maybe a little deeper, and then they start working back and they start creeping back up. Sometimes I'll have them skip a level. So they go from high to low to medium and back up. So really, really important that you work not only different heights on the band, on the leg, and you get around the feet to work external and internal external rotators of the hip, but you also want to understand the degrees of the bend and how it affects the band walk. Okay? Next video, I'm going to share with you another way to use the band when we want to start going after the hip flexor in body positions. Hey, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube site, right, The Speed Guide, and I really appreciate it. I'd love to hear your feedback as well.